All right, thank you. Thank you for having me. I know many of y'all. So I'm here tonight. Actually, let me start by mentioning how the book kind of came about. And actually, some of y'all probably remember or were involved in that. I mean, Jan Wrede was working at the Cibolo Nature Center, and I was working with her. We were doing landowner workshops. And we started early on doing wildlife tax valuation workshops. And we realized also one of the things was we knew that our clientele was smaller acreage. And so we knew that deer should not be what should be managing for multiple reasons, but mainly because they can't manage for a population on small acreage. And that's part of the law. And so we did these workshops, and first we did them. There were workshops like that, wildlife tax valuation workshops that Parks and Wildlife were doing around Texas. But most of them were only like a half day. And we decided, well, we need to go to a day. And then we realized that wasn't enough time. So we went 2 days. We realized that wasn't enough time. We went 3 days. And so I know Dusty helped us for years with the wildlife tax valuation workshops there. And but one of the things is when we would talk to people, we would talk to them about, okay, for managing for birds, you go to this resource for this information, and you go to this resource for that information, and you go over here to get that. And we'd have a mountain of books and tons of pamphlets and stuff like that. And they were like, isn't there an easier way? And so actually Jan said, and I don't remember this, but Jan said that we talked about creating a booklet at first. And so the booklet 12 years later became a 500-page book. Right? Now, the Texas A&M Press was really supportive. Actually, we signed a contract with them. We were supposed to deliver it like in 2 years. And they hung in there. We had life. Both of us had life get in the way. And so, but one of the things about the book, so that's what we're here to talk about is the Land Stewardship for Birds book. Actually, that's what we wanted to name it originally, and they called it Attracting Birds in the Texas Hill Country, and it sounded more like putting out feeders. And one of the things about the book is it's not, and I think that many of y'all know that it's not a bird book. It's not a bird ID book, and nor is it a plant ID book. It is a stewardship book. It is to teach you or give you the information about how to be a better steward for birds on your property. So that is really what it's about. So it's a resource book. So it's very different from that perspective. So what I want to try to accomplish, I want to give you some opportunity to be able to tell the difference in healthy and unhealthy. And I'm going to focus on grasslands and live oak savanna because that's what most of us have as habitat. If you're lucky enough to have some riparian habitat, awesome. Or canyon or something like that, that's great. But this is more general. Most people have some of this. Also, I want to inspire you to improve native plant communities, which those are bird habitats, right? And so what I'm going to discuss, I'm going to do an overview of just what is stewardship. I'm going to talk about birds as indicators for success. And then we're going to talk about some examples of habitats and bird requirements, that some of the information that's in the book. And then we're going to talk about, I'm going to try to go fast enough so we can get to land stewardship techniques. And at that point, it's going to be more of a audience-led discussion. So we can go over one of these topics, probably just one of these topics. And so here they are. And so you get to think about it. We'll be back to this slide here in a minute. So what is land stewardship? Basically, stewardship is the careful and responsible management of something entrusted to one's care. And when we're talking about land stewardship, it's the land that's entrusted to our care. And also, one of the things is stewardship transcends your own ownership. right? It's part of it's your legacy, right? And so whether that's to your kids or to the next owner, stewardship is longer than just the amount of time that you have it. Also, Texas is a privately owned state. 96, 97% privately owned. We've probably all heard that before. And so in Texas, as opposed to Western states where they have lots of public land, it is really dependent upon what private landowners do. And so basically there's a tremendous opportunity, but also responsibility as private landowners to help manage birds in Texas. And so really what we want you to do is we want you to become better land stewards for birds. So why birds? One thing is birds are charismatic. I mean, they are, they're the one thing that I think most people can identify. When you talk to people, it is one of the things they identify about their property that they enjoy, right? That they will mention a bird species that has come to a feeder or to a bird bath, or they've seen nesting on their property. And so it is how people identify with the wildlife that's on their property. Birds represent diversity, both from a habitat perspective, but they are very diverse. And so that's how they represent diversity. And basically, and this is kind of a wildlife management truism, which is that when birds flourish, then all other kinds of wildlife are going to flourish. So if we do a good job of habitat management for birds, we're really managing for all kinds of wildlife. And birds can really benefit from habitat improvements. So we know that we can do things, habitat improvements on our property, and we can improve measurably the improvements to the bird population. And birds need our help. That is a big issue, and actually, here's why. Basically, in an article that was done in 2019 in Science, there was this publication or this article, and basically, it was the primary thing they were using for their research, or actually, what it really was it was a metadata meta paper. Basically, it looked at multiple different types of researches. It wasn't just one research project. One of the big data sets is breeding bird survey data. Has anybody, I bet Tom's participated in breeding bird survey data. Anybody else done a breeding bird survey block? I did when I was in Western Kansas. I did a couple of, nobody was out there to do them. But they've been done all over the country. They've been done since the 60s. And so it's a really robust data set. They keep, it's basically been done the same way for the last more than 50 years. And they also use things like NexRad radar data. So they can see migrating birds with NexRad radar. And there's been some really interesting work in recent years with looking at that data and being able to do estimates of the number of birds migrating over a particular location. And you can imagine, like in South Texas, can really see a lot of migrating birds. And so that is another part of one of those big data sets that they were using for this. But what they came up with is that the total abundance of birds has decreased by 3 billion birds since the 70s. And that's a 30%, almost 30% decline in abundance. That should shock everybody. Even more so than that, and I don't think I have a pointer, but it's pretty obvious from this, but is that they've declined the bird populations in every major biome have declined. The most significant, someone was mentioning to me about having a quail in their yard, but grassland birds and quail are kind of the real, poster child for especially wildlife people of the grassland bird that has declined the most. But you can see actually, if you know statistics, right, the little bar means part of their confidence interval. It's really narrow with grassland birds. that means it's been dramatic. But many of those bird groups have declined, and there's only one exception up at the very top is wetlands. And one of the things that in the paper that they really draw out, and it is very concerning, is that habitat generalists and forest generalists both have declined. And these are birds, generalists are birds, unlike the golden cheek warbler is a specialist. Where a generalist, if you think of something like a cardinal, that's kind of a generalist, although cardinals are not declining. But that's an example. You know, they're very common. They can use a wide variety of habitats and food sources and such as that. So I joke that an urban example of a generalist is a grackle. And grackles will eat at McDonald's. They eat at, you know, Cane's. They don't care. They get, you know, they'll go and get shade and cars at HEB. They drink irrigation water. So they're not in decline either. But that's another example kind of an urban generalist. So seeing generalists decline is really concerning. I'll back up a little bit and said when we were doing our book, it was before this paper ever came out, and we realized, looking at breeding bird survey data, that many of the birds we were talking about utilizing were what we ended up calling priority birds, which is a vernacular that many agencies and organizations use to talk about birds that need assistance somehow or have some other issue that they need assistance. And so we were really kind of shocked at how many were priority birds as we did it. We felt a little bit like we were crying wolf, but then things like this come out and they really just help, you know, emphasize that yes, it's real, that many of the birds that we think of as common and have declined significantly, and we need to be concerned about that. The one thing I'll finish up real quick and move on to the next slide is that wetlands. So why would wetlands have increased? Why would wetland birds have increased? Anybody have any? It came about in the 60s. Actually, there was some groups that came into existence, like Ducks Unlimited, right? And actually, one of the things that also happened was actually those groups got together with state agencies and federal agencies and other nonprofit organizations, and they wanted to save waterfowl and specifically ducks, right? But it was the same kind of thing. They knew when they were doing good duck habitat, they were benefiting all kinds of, you know, upland sandpipers or, you know, spotted sandpipers and other species that were utilizing that. There was a toad in western Kansas. Now I'm blanking on what the name of it was, but there was a toad that basically nested in wetland sites, these very ephemeral wetland sites in western Kansas. So they were really dependent on those same kind of wetlands. So when we managed for ducks, we were benefiting a whole, you know, huge suite of other wildlife species. So, and what they did was they came up with what was called the North American Waterfowl Management Plan. And it was an international effort. Canada and Mexico also worked with us. And there were actually oil companies were involved in it as well. Oh, no, I'm going to forget, but I don't think it was Phillips 66, but one of the, or ConocoPhillips, but one of those other oil companies had got really involved in the waterfowl, in the North American Waterfowl Management Plan. And a lot of it, I think, came from offshore drilling money, that's where some of the money came for the North American Waterfowl Management Plan. The reason I even take any time to mention that is that's an opportunity to show that we can turn it around. So we can do something about that. We can get together, and we've done it in the past, and it can happen again. So that's kind of, while this is pretty depressing data and concerning, there's some bright spots there, and that's an example of one of those bright spots. Painted bunting. Who's seen a painted bunting before? Pretty much everybody. Everybody's seen painted buntings. And actually, they are just, this is from breeding bird survey data, and the core of their, population is in Texas and Oklahoma, I'll mention. But but it really is. I mean, look at that, the focus. The brighter red it is, that's where their core breeding is. So this is a Texas population of birds. So painted buntings. And here's the statewide breeding bird survey trend. And that is not good. That's about a 30% decline in that species. Now, they're still common. And I can't remember, it may have been John Herron with Parks and Wildlife. He said, our job is to keep common species common. And so we shouldn't be waiting until they become endangered, or threatened with endangered, that we are thinking, oh, now we need to do something about it. We should really be focusing on seeing that these birds are declining and trying to figure out what we can do. So, that's pretty concerning, that population trend. But, turning around and saying another bright spot, as I mentioned, started talking about what we did. So, with our workshops, was doing wildlife tax evaluation workshops. Well, wildlife tax evaluation and people with that has increased dramatically. Now, you look at that graph and you go, where's 2022 data? Why don't you have it? Because it's not out yet. I went and checked like a week ago. And they're still working on it. It basically is done by A&M, the Natural Resource Institute. If you've never gone to this site, it's pretty cool. It's got some really interesting data. This is all data from the appraisal districts. And so they have information on ag lands and property values and all kinds of interesting data. But obviously, one of the things that we're really interested in is that wildlife tax valuation. And I expect that it's really up there now. So so 5 million acres in 2017 so that's when I talk about it being a privately owned state, and then we've got 5 million acres that are specifically being managed for wildlife, okay, under the wildlife tax valuation, is a great opportunity. How many people have a wildlife tax valuation? Pretty many folks in here. And so working with neighbors and doing things not only on your own place, but with your neighbors can really have an impact, even a bigger impact. And so that's another bright spot. So land stewardship for birds. So what we kind of talk about, especially in our workshops, but also in the book, is that one of the things to do is to identify your habitats. Look at the types of habitats that you have. The first 6 chapters in the book are on different habitat types, and identify those habitats, and then and determine how many you have, different habitat types, and the quality. Now that may be a little more difficult, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. So quality may be a little harder to come by, but that also tells you, what do I need to improve? Then you select 2 or 3 species, and that's what, rather than trying to manage for as many bird species as that come through our area, is to be able to target just 2 or 3 species for each habitat type that represent some diversity in that habitat type. So don't, one of the things is, don't pick, 2 ground nesting birds, for a particular habitat type. Pick one that's a ground nesting bird and maybe a wintering bird, or a bird that uses, more shrubby habitat in addition to it. So don't pick 2 wrens. So don't pick a Carolina wren and a Buick's wren. So and so pick ones that represent the diversity that's in your habitat, and then determine the stewardship practices. And this is information that's directly out of our book, that you can find that information. So this is what Jan likes to say, is to be prepared to be your own best advisor. Look and listen, ask questions, keep learning, find trusted advisors. She always said that I was one of her trusted advisors. and make science-based decisions. That's really important as well. So it's fun to talk across the fence with the neighbor and go talk about, well, I saw this and, some kind of anecdotal, observation. Those can add up and actually end up being data, but don't necessarily count on anecdotal, on just what someone says across the fence as being, um, find some other science-based source that supports that. So, as I mentioned, the first 6 chapters are on habitat types. The next 3 chapters are on chapter 7. We talk about it being predators and other dangerous animals, and then deer management. Anybody have an issue with deer? It is such a big issue. Actually, there are about 3.5 million deer in Texas. We are kind of the ground zero for high deer densities in the U.S. There's only a few places that have as high densities as we do in Texas. And actually, we're seeing even higher densities in urban settings. That's just kind of crazy. We were talking about Cordillera earlier, and just the deer densities that they have there are just pretty staggering. Then also cedar and other brush management. Brush management is really kind of something, of course, I can't tell you how many times people would come to me and go, okay, I've bought a piece of property, and we went out and we got a guy on a bulldozer, and he cleared all the cedar. And so now I want to talk to you about creating some wildlife habitat. And it's like, oh, I wish you had done that before. So cedar, especially in this country, is really a big deal. So what are about those dangerous animals, those other dangerous animals? So one of them is red imported fire ants, or we just use the shorthand RIFA. So red imported fire ants. They're an exotic. They came from Brazil, from the Amazon basin. They don't have the same predators that they did there. They forage night and day all the time. One of the things in controlling them, because I know I probably won't talk about it anywhere else, but one of the things about controlling them is realizing that there are other ant species we really want to protect and that are beneficial to us. Not only because anybody not like horned lizards, so it's kind of like asking people if they don't like kids or something. And if you grew up in Texas, everybody's got a horned lizard story, right? Is that harvester ants are the primary food source for them. Will they eat fire ants? Yes, but we don't think that, as biologists, is a primary food source. That it's harvester ants and other ant species. This county probably has 50 to 70 different ant species, so you'd be surprised. There is one ant, just to give you an example of also not wanting to being careful and measured about how you're controlling when you're trying to deal with something like red imported fire ants, is Pharalius. Anybody know Pharalius? The blue cheese ant. And so it's the one, it makes a little kind of volcano that looks like this. It may come out of pavement or sidewalk, and little bitty red ant, and they won't bite, but if you pick them up and you smash them and you smell them, they smell just like blue cheese. So that's why they call them the blue cheese ant. But if you look at that little volcano, okay, their mound that's come up, you'll see dead fire ants around it. They are predators on fire ants. So we got a native ant species that's helping us take care of fire ants. So we want to be careful about how we do that. So how we go about dealing with fire ants. And the issue with fire ants is that they are fierce competitors for all kinds of insects. And where they are abundant, they decrease insect diversity. And insect diversity is bird diversity. That's really important to birds. And I've got another slide about that. So cats, I'm going to talk about that in just a second, but feral hogs, anybody got feral hogs? Yeah, I know Dusty does. And so, but there's it's estimated, AgriLife Extension estimates there's 3.5 million hogs in Texas. Well, that's the same number as deer. That's an amazing number. Okay. And so they've had a long time to establish a foothold. The feral hogs probably established when Spanish explorers came through the country. So it's several hundred years they've been here. Okay. And then brown-headed cowbirds. That's a real, I know that Dusty, I trap at the Cibolo Preserve. Yeah, Tom, do you trap? Yeah. And so it's not a fun thing to do. It is the least fun thing I do as a wildlife biologist, but it is something that, and we can talk about it more if you want to ask questions about it, but we are responsible for their abundance and their impact on bird populations. And so we bear a responsibility to that. So that's my soapbox as far as cowbirds. So this is actually from actually a master naturalist in the San Antonio chapter of Master Naturalist. Joey Fisher-Hine, she's an artist, and she did this. She called it Silent Spring 4 billion one and counting. And there's our painted bunny in the jaws there. So one of the things is cats are really serious predators. And just to give you an example, there's a research paper from a rural part of, I think it's Ohio, and that researchers looked at what kinds of impact cats were having on wildlife. And basically, they were killing more wildlife, and only about 30% is birds. The rest are other things. And that they were killing more wildlife than all other mammalian predators combined in the area. So that meant foxes, coyotes, in that country, even mink. And so raccoons, all those combined were not eating as much. So if you're a cat owner, most important thing is spay and neuter your pet. Keep your cat indoor. If it wants to take a walk, go outside, use a leash. And, that's always fun to watch someone try to take a cat out on a leash. But you can also do catios. And so you might have heard me mention catios before. But so if you hadn't, look it up. Google it. Google catios. And so you can give your cat an outdoor experience. But we really shouldn't have feral cat populations. So dumping cats and stuff like that is just really detrimental to bird populations. So, and this is kind of back to my insect statement about fire ants, but forbs / wildflowers are food for birds and insects. So if you're managing for pollinators, forbs, wildflowers are a huge part of that. But the insects are also the food for birds. And so we can't, forget that they are really critical, and that even birds we think of as eating seeds like cardinals, and they're just really well designed to eat seeds, they eat insects, when they're feeding their young. And that's because they're a high protein food source, easily digestible. And so that is really important for breeding populations. So, and the vast majority, there's only a few exceptions. White-winged doves, mourning doves, they produce crop milk. So they do have a different mechanism. But most other birds, it's all insects. So, can you recognize, native plant communities? These are bird habitats, basically. And as you know, this is where they find those basic components of habitat. As master naturalists, you should have this all memorized by now. So food, water, shelter, and space. And so to talk a little bit about grasslands, so a good example for grasslands would be lesser goldfinch. This is also one of how many people have lesser goldfinches or feed lesser goldfinches? And so common bird, but it's declined by about 60%. It has really taken it a big hit. And so it's really important, year-round resident in our area. And so a priority bird. Some of the things, these are from what we call our bird summaries in our book. And this is just some of the information that you'd find in a bird summary. And so, you know, one of the things is for them, plant diversity is really important. They do eat insects, even though we have them coming to our yards probably primarily through thistle and thistle socks. They also eat lots of insects. They'll actually do that from a perch. But one of the things is really to manage the diversity that's in a plant community. And so prescribed burning is one of the most effective ways. Besides, also down lower is rotational grazing. And if you think about, I know that a lot of y'all might go, well, I've just got 20 acres, and is to work with a neighbor. If you have a neighbor that's got cattle, think about it. Think about using their cattle, allowing their cattle to come on your property for a short period of time to increase the plant diversity that's there. It can really make a big benefit. So so that's a little bit about that. There's the lesser goldfinch, and so that's my shot of healthy grasslands. And one of the things to look at it is in the foreground, you see some forbs in there. In the rest of it, you see a variety, dark green, light green, and actually the real light stuff, well, that's KR bluestem. We aren't getting rid of KR bluestem. We're going to have to live with it. But you can see it's got a good diversity. This is actually Cibolo Nature Center, and it does have a good diversity out there. And that's what a healthy grassland should look like. That is not. That's all KR bluestem. I challenge you to try to find even though it's a fall shot, is to find a remnant forb, you know, wildflower, you dried up in that. Biologists tongue in cheek will say it's a biological desert. It is so low in diversity that that's really a problem. So you can just see it from the photo that there's not a variety of grasses there. So that's really one of the things you want to look for. Another thing to look for is your feet. So look down, don't just look across. So in this slide, you can see, I wonder if I can, no. You can see that kind of right in the middle of the slide, you can actually see bare ground. And if you want to be able to have places for forbs to grow, wildflowers to grow, you need bare ground. If you need places for, grasshopper sparrows to pick up, insects or seeds in the wintertime, they need bare ground. And so that's really important. So you can see in this shot, there's some really good diversity. There's grass there. There's wildflowers. It looks like Monarda and some brown-eyed Susans. And so the mix. So as a biologist and as a master naturalist, we should be looking at that ground and going, a grassland's not just grass. It should also have forbs, but it also needs to have places for forbs to grow, as well as birds to pick up the seeds and insects that they eat. So bare ground is an important component of a grassland community. So this is unhealthy grassland. And one of the things you can see, and actually these pictures are only taken about 100 yards apart. And it's the very same field. It's only divided by a road. And the one on the right was burned about 1.5 years ago. And the one on the left hadn't been. And you can see the thatch buildup. You can't see bare ground on the photo on the left, the unhealthy. And you don't see very many forbs. There's some there, but you don't see very many. So that is really important. And I'm going to share, I'm taking probably more time than I wanted to, but I want to share actually, this is at the Cibolo Preserve, which is next door to the Cibolo Nature Center. And the Cibolo Preserve has been doing a prairie bird survey A variety, actually have about 5 transect lines out on the property, and we've been doing those for 22 years or something like that. In the past 2 years, and of course these are drought years, and we know that the winter grassland birds were not very good because of that drought, or as abundant. They probably flew past us and went someplace else. Uh, is that we only counted in 2 years in 5 different surveys that were done over 3 different dates. So that's 15 surveys, 30 surveys in the 2 years. We only saw 15 grassland birds, 2 different species. Um, we went out just on a lark because actually one of our survey lines is right next to this uh, plot, this grass plot that we turned, and we walked, did the very same transect through that area and saw 15 birds, grassland birds, in one transect, just doing it one time. So that burn had really made a difference. It was very desirable by those birds, even in a drought year. So that's the power of good management. Um, so live oak savanna, this is really kind of classic painted bunting habitat. One of the things that's really important to know is how many nesting pairs, so, how many pairs should I expect on my property, on my 20 acres? Well, if you have really good habitat, you should expect 4 pairs. If you have 1 pair, then you've got room to improve, right? So think about that. And one of the things about painted buntings, they nest 3 to 5 feet off the ground. Will they nest higher? Absolutely. Will they nest lower? Absolutely. But their preferred height is 3 to 5 feet. What do deer do at 3 to 5 feet? They eat everything, right? So it really impacts. Deer are probably impacting painted bunting habitat, nesting habitat because of that. That's why under what to do, controlling deer overpopulation is really important. They also are highly parasitized, one of our highly parasitized species by brown-headed cowbirds. And so that's one of the reasons also to do brown-headed cowbird control. So here's healthy live oak savanna. How many people have been to the Kerr area? Who's been to the Kerr area? And so great examples of healthy live oak savanna at the Kerr area. And that's where this picture was taken. And you can see there's just a whole diversity. There's a red bud in there. There's shin oak. There's greenbrier. Yes, greenbrier is good habitat, right? And so, but you see live oaks in the background. And think about it. What you're seeing is layers of habitat. It's not just some grass on the ground and there's that. And it's not just forbs, there's that. But it's low growing shrubs, it's vines, and at every layer. So if you're a painted bunting, this is primo habitat. There's loads of painted buntings out at the Kerr area. So that's an example. So one of the things to think about is that those layers of habitat. This is not good habitat. And it's pretty obvious. And you can see that there is a severe browse line, and that really there's no shrub layer at all. And the other issue is there's an exotic species in the photo. What is it? Fire ants. You can see the fire ant mounds out there. So yeah, there's multiple things going on with that photo. So that's unhealthy. So again, the layers are missing. There's not good grass structure. There's an invasive species there. There's lots of potential work to be done on that piece of property. So one of the things, so you may just have a backyard. So what are the plants that are often found in people's backyards? Nandina, that's a good one. Actually, what I decided it was live oaks and St. Augustine grass. And that's a little tongue in cheek, right? But and if you know that's healthy backyard habitat. Again, layers of habitat. And if you think about it, one of the other things is most of y'all may have live oaks in your yard. And so think about your yard and read the chapter on live oak savannas and think about your yard being a habitat, a live oak savanna habitat. So how to manage it more like that native habitat. Don't just read the backyard habitat chapter. So, but you can see lots of diversity, lots of flowering plants, probably lots of insects, lots of pollinators. So that's good, healthy habitat. That's not, right? That's almost that tongue in cheek. It's just grass in St. August and a couple of live oaks. And there's something going up to, but there's a lot of opportunity there to improve the habitat, even in a backyard. And there are a lot of species that can benefit from it, like our kind of backyard bird, the tufted titmouse, black-crested tufted titmouse. So that's and we go, that's a priority bird. How many people have not seen black-crested titmouse, right? I mean, it is so common. But one of the things is most of this population is in the hill country or in central Texas. So what we do in managing for this bird matters. So important things, because they are so common in our backyard, they eat lots of seeds, they eat lots of insects, is to keeping your feeders clean. 1 part bleach to 9 parts water. Do it at least a couple times a year. Most people do not. So need to do that. Also, keeping cats indoors. That's really important. They're cavity nesting, and they use about their territory is about a pair per 10.5 acres. One of the things is, if you have a yard, I mean, everybody has a yard, even if they have acreage, and so is to have fun. Okay. This is actually a person in Boerne, and it's going to be fun. Just hang on. And what they do is they have this, they every season. So this was obviously for the 4th of July, but they do something for Halloween, and they always have these sign, and usually they have a sign up, and it said, it's like a note to the husband about, Valentine's Day or something like that. So have fun with not only your acreage, but you're also around your yard and your backyard as well. So the steps to stewardship were identify your habitats, the different types, and the quality. And we talked a little bit about that. Select 2 to 3 species per habitat type as target species for improving that. And then determine the stewardship practices. And that information is found in those chapters as well as in the bird summaries specifically for those species. So we already talked about what was land stewardship. We talked about birds as indicators for success. And we talked about some examples of habitat and bird requirements. So we started at 7. So it's 7:45. So I got 15 minutes. And so here we are to our techniques. So if y'all want to tell me, we're going to kind of take a survey and go, what do we want to go into? I will start by asking how many people are familiar with a Texas Forest Service's Map My Property? Raise the hands. And so, okay, we might just take a second to go over that. But Map My Property is an awesome GIS tool that is readily available to everybody. It is free and it's easy, and it's got some really cool stuff in it. And I'm a geek about that kind of stuff. But what other things might y'all want to see? Brush control. How many people want to see brush control? Okay. How many people want to see deer management? Okay. Grassland management? Bird surveys? Oh, bird surveys. Cool. Well, and that's what we're going to focus on. And so what I would like to do at this point is I'm going to just start the grassland, but I'm going to come back because that's got the stuff on Map My Property. And this is Map My Property. It's with Texas Forest Service. So if you look up Texas Forest Service and Map My Property, Google it, you'll get it. We talk about it in the book. And one of the things is, God, 5 or 10 years is just a world of, just a ton of time to go by as far as things on the internet and such as that. One of the things about it, you can put in a location and it'll usually get you close. That little blue dot is what it gave me for that address. That's close enough to know where I'm at. That's what we're kind of looking at. That's the Cibolo Nature Center in Boerne. But one of the things is on the right-hand side, you see a list of layers, and that's those. I can point to it. Oops. Yeah. No. Yeah. Right up in there. Oops. But right up above that layers, it looks like sheets of paper. That's the tab you push on, and this comes down. The bottom one says parcels. So instead of trying to figure out where your piece of property is, your boundary, it's like, is it that tree? And then where's the edge of the, but this is the parcel data, which is, that's just amazing for. Exactly. And that is really what they've made it for, is it's really for doing Firewise stuff and creating a plan related to, oh, yes, I'm supposed to repeat the question, or the comment, which was that they had used it to do the Firewise for your community or your neighborhood. And that's exactly what it was designed for. And so thank you for the reminder. And that's the Zoom thing. I forget about. I'm sorry, people at Zoom. I forget about you. But this is super neat. This is really makes it easy to do that. The other thing you can do is you can draw out your piece of property. You can clip the soil data from it, which I'm starting to really geek out here. And so you can get if you look at when you clip it, you can see on the left-hand side at the bottom, it says you can get a summary or a full report. Click on full report. You go down, and there's one thing that's called an ecological site description. And a bunch of soils are grouped together to ecological sites. And this is great data. And if you look right there, there's the ecological class. It's actually in this, both bottomland. So the ecological site description, can you pull up the PDF for me? I'll talk about it while we pull up the PDF, and hopefully the people on Zoom will be able to see it. But it'll give you a report. When you click on that link, it will take you to a description, and actually then you go down a little further and you click on the full report, and it will give you about 20 to 30 pages of information about the soil. And there we go. And you can, I'm going to get up to the very top. And this is Low Stony Hills ecological site. And I just printed off, actually, I made a PDF that only had 5 of the 30 pages. But one of the things is the ecological dynamics. As a master naturalist, you should be really into this. So you read along, and it tells you about what the dominant plant communities probably were historically, what are the major drivers that influence that plant community. It is an ecologist wonderland. And there's even a transition state, which is, geeking out even more, which is, it says if you started with a grassland and then you head to a brush area, how did you get there? What were the practices that got you there, but how can you get back too? So this is really kind of an ecologist flow diagram that's very fun. But what's really valuable is you go down and there's a plant list for the kind of historic plant community. Now, are we trying to get right back to that? No, but it can really help us determine the health of our piece of property. And so like in this case, you can see that little bluestem is right near the top, and that most of it is midgrasses, and it could be almost all little bluestem. So if you go out to your property, assessing the health, the quality of that, you look at it and it doesn't have a bunch of little bluestem, there's your measure. There's one of your measures to go, I need to increase the little bluestem on this property. If you've got a ton of King Ranch bluestem, are you still going to have a lot of King Ranch bluestem when you get done? Yep, you are. You just have to kind of realize that that's part of where we're at. So we're not going to take it back to, the Spanish explorers version. So, but it helps us be able to assess the quality and some of the work that needs to be done. So that's totally geeking out. Can I get back to my, stop sharing that? That's a good question. I don't think it does. It has, there's a ton of stuff that I never look at that's engineering stuff about building tanks and building houses and the stability of that and doing septic tanks and all kinds of stuff. So, oh, yes. Did it have archaeological information in it? And so basically, I don't know. That's a good question. It's got a lot of other information in it, and it really is. And so it used to be, anybody ever used the old soil survey, paper versions of a soil survey? Yeah, Dusty. But that's, basically that's what it is. And it's actually even more accessible than it used to be. You can go back to, I would have gone the other way. That's okay. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's all right. That's all right. I'm gonna back up to right. Oop, right there. And then we're gonna return, and then we're gonna go to bird surveys, and we're gonna finish up there. I only have 7 minutes. So bird survey techniques. Basically, there's a number of survey techniques you can use. How many people have nest boxes? Anybody have nest boxes? So nest boxes are a pretty easy way to do. There are sources of information. So Nest Watch through Cornell. Cornell is just a excellent source of information. So nest boxes. So there's information for collecting information on that. Opportunistic bird ID, and then you can do point counts. So nest box surveys, this is basically for cavity nesting birds. And anybody knows Dick Park? There's Dick Park. Cleaning and maintaining those nest boxes is really critical. That's really important. That typically about 1 box per 5 acres, although things like ash throated flycatchers are like, and I'm doing this off the top of my head, but it's like 12 or 15 acres per pair. So, different species, nest box species will use different, but that's kind of, and wren's nest is in a density of almost a box every acre, right? And so but for wildlife tax valuation, they are willing to go, well, 1 to 5 acres is fine. And really, you should be determining that based on the species you're managing for. Also realize nest boxes are a supplement. you really should be managing for snags, native cavities. That's where they have nested for millennia. And, you know, we've just said dead trees are bad and we cut them down, and to the detriment of cavity nesting birds. So about 1 per 5 acres. Eastern bluebirds are common, but as I already mentioned, wrens, black-crested titmice are also cavity nesting birds. Predator guards are really important, putting predator guards on those. And then also whether there are 2 types of predator guards there. So there's actually that metal one, and there's also this one. When your squirrels or woodpeckers come and make the holes bigger, you just put a piece on the outside, but that actually helps you in deterring raccoons because it creates a thicker thing and it's harder for them to bend their arm and get down there and grab the eggs. So what are the procedures? One of the things is clean and maintain your box by February 15th. And then check them at least every 2 weeks. And really, you can do it every week, and that's what you probably should do. But at least if you're doing it every 2 weeks, you'll see them building the nest, the chicks are in there, and then you can make an assumption about how many you've produced. You want to record the number of species that are nesting, the number of eggs, the number that have hatched, and the number that fledge. And then also clean out the nest after each successful nesting. You can actually get multiple broods of birds out of the same nest box in a single season. Okay? Don't let them just pile on, and they'll pile on another one. And if they've already done that, then I would leave it. But at some point, it'll be full, and they won't be able to make another nest. So that also makes a big point, which is your nest box needs to be open. So you need to be able to open it. There's a nest box data sheet. The new edition of the book has a data sheet in there, in the appendix, and an updated version as well as data on that. Opportunistic bird ID. Basically, it's like birding. It's intense observation with binoculars and spotting scopes. You survey all habitat types. You survey them once a month, year-round, and at least do it in the quarterly in the spring, summer, fall, and winter. At least do it that time. And basically, you record the time that's spent observing, the number of observers, and the number of birds seen and heard by habitat. So you come up with birds per time, per habitat, per observer. And so that normalizes it. So even if you go out for less amount of time with more observers, you can standardize that to be able to come up with comparable from one observation time to another observation time. Begin a half hour before sunrise and to about mid-morning or 10 o'clock. That's kind of the average endpoint. Some of the resources that are available, obviously there's field guides and audio stuff online, but what has really boomed is mobile applications. How many people are using Merlin? Yeah. And eBird. How many people are using eBird? Yeah. And so Merlin, and actually I saw more hands for Merlin than I did for eBird. And so I mentioned Cornell, all about birds, but they have, Nest Watch and Feeder Watch. Actually, Nest Watch is an excellent one for if you're doing nest boxes. They organize the data. They utilize the data with researchers, but you can get back or look at it and see information about that. Point counts. And so one of the things to do with point counts is, so it's for breeding birds. These are done in the spring, and they basically are done from the 1st of May till the end of June. We're still in the point count region time of year. Points should be permanently marked so you can go back and do them. Again, located relative to the habitat types that are out there. 1 per 2 acres with a maximum of 25 is just kind of a standard. The spacing between them needs to be at least 100 yards. So you can do systematic approach where you actually go out and you do a grid and you just put it out there and you assume that it's going to represent the diversity in the habitat, or you can do it by habitat type and you put it in the different habitats to create your points. So that's the 2 different approaches to identifying your points. You basically do them 3 times during the season, repeat it the same, as close to the same time every year as possible. So one of the things like yellow-billed cuckoos come really late. And if you do them too early, you will miss yellow-billed cuckoos. And so that's also one reason to like spread them out, your surveys a little bit. So even if you do one in the first week of May, you may miss yellow-billed cuckoos, but doing them later, you can get those. But then the types of census, so where nest boxes, I thought I had it in here. Point count, but we'll go ahead and talk about it. And opportunistic bird ID. What it really depends upon is the appropriate technique, being consistent, accurate records. And so with that, I will take any questions. But one of the things I'll mention is I do think, now Tom may take take me to task on this, but I think that that Merlin may be a way for average landowners that have very basic birding skills to be able and do a really good survey. They can go to a point. Now, how is Merlin 100% accurate? No, it is not. And there's all kinds of things that we've all seen. I mean, I did an example over at the Nature Center here and went out and it hurt a mountain bluebird. And I don't think it hurt a mountain bluebird out when I was in the, outside right there. Yeah, pie-billed grebe. And so, but the one thing is if you're picking those species that you're going to monitor for, so you've already decided that these are species that are found in your property and that you're going to focus on. It doesn't have to be all, whatever 100 and some species that may occur on your property. It can just be the ones that represent the habitat diversity on your property. And so so you can use those. And I was working with a landowner with doing exactly that. They are not birders. They are not very proficient, but it allows them to be able to have a fairly consistent and accurate way for the birds that they're interested in to do that survey consistently. And, am I as good as Tom? Absolutely not. Tom is a way better birder than I am. But that means but if I always do the survey, it's based on my skill level. I think that's the same thing with Merlin. You realize it doesn't have the skill level of Tom, but it does have a fairly consistent skill level. I think it's probably because it's AI based, it's probably going to change over time, probably going to get better. But I think that's something that really puts bird surveys like point counts in the hands of average people, average landowners. So that's one of my big take homes is sort of new technology to deal with bird surveys. So I want to thank you all for having me here. If there are any questions down there. I did bring copies of my books. The question was, did I bring copies of my book? And so you guys on Zoom, but go to A&M. Actually, you can purchase it through the A&M website. And if you use the code Stewardship, you can get a 25% discount on the book from A&M. That about pays for your shipping. So don't go to Amazon. They never supported us. And so A&M did. So I encourage you to buy it from A&M. I do dedicate all my presentations to my brother Ben. He's the one with the fish. Ben passed away about 5 years ago from ALS, complications from ALS. Lou Gehrig's disease, horrible, horrible disease. Basically, your body, that's what Stephen Hawkins has. He's an outlier in still being alive, but it's a horrible disease. Remember the ice bucket challenge? That was ALS. So we'd like to end that. The other is to my son, memory of my son, who was killed right after he graduated from college with his wildlife degree. But actually, I created a fund in his name up in the Ozarks in a watershed for the War Eagle watershed in Northwest Arkansas. And so through a foundation up there. And so all my royalties, so I don't make anything off the book, and actually don't write a book to make money, is that all the royalties from my book go go to Rufus Fund and in Arkansas, and actually all my book sales, anything that I make from book sales, all goes to Rufus Fund. So I to the biologist that he would have been. So and so with that, I thank you for having me. I appreciate it, and I know I've actually probably, y'all all have probably seen me before at classes and stuff like that. So it's fun to come to a local chapter. Actually, I am doing Waco later this week on Thursday. I'm doing Waco, and so none of the people there know me. So they're in for a treat, right? So thank y'all. Thanks for coming.